I have often felt lost on diplomatic missions across the galaxy, but this time was different. This was no ordinary treaty or cultural exploration. This mission to Tyrion, the planet of Emperor Carr, had a different purpose beneath the diplomatic mask. Tyrion was one of the most strategic resource planets in the galaxy, and Emperor Carr was ruthlessly exploiting it. His people were forced into slave labor, submitting without hope to the despot's tyranny. As my ship entered Tyrion's atmosphere, I felt a strange unease. As I passed over the vast mines and industrial centers controlled by the authorities, I wondered how the natural beauty of this place could have been so distorted. The people of this planet had lived under this oppression for centuries, unable to find a way out. But my role here was not limited to understanding this oppression. I was not here as a diplomatic representative, but as someone who wanted to liberate this planet. As I prepared to meet Emperor Carr in Karzal, the planet's capital, the weight in my heart grew heavier. The thought of meeting such a cruel man made me uncomfortable, but I had to do it for his people. When the doors opened, Carr, seated on the massive throne before me, was exactly as I had imagined him, tall, menacing, and full of arrogance. His angry eyes showed his contempt for me and for humanity. "Lucas Johnson," Carr said, a mocking tone in his voice. "The Galactic Council has sent a human scientist? I've had enough of this diplomatic stuff." There was a threat in his words, but he failed to recognize my true purpose here. "It's not just diplomacy, Emperor," I said coldly. "I am also charged with investigating what has been done to the people of your planet and reporting any violations of intergalactic law." Carr laughed briefly. "My people, they are but tools. The resources of this planet are vital to my future and that of my empire. Their reports do not diminish my power." Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the room. This strong and confident figure was Lydia, the Emperor's daughter. What I had heard about her before was true. Her blonde hair spilled over her shoulders, revealing the strength embodied in her armor. But there was something in her eyes, something deep inside, something more than contempt for humans. "Watching my father play diplomatic games has become boring," Lydia said, turning her gaze to me. "Humans, weak beings like you, are just pawns in the galaxy on such missions." This condescension made me feel her defensiveness towards me. But he had not yet realized the power of a human's intelligence. I just gave her a look, not wanting to get into a situation where words would be too much. I was sure I would change Lydia's mind in time. Our meeting with Emperor Carr was brief, but in that time I was able to observe the weaknesses of the planet and the suffering of its people. Tyrion was a paradise, ruthlessly exploited by Carr to increase his wealth. Could it be that the despair in the eyes of the people here held a spark of rebellion deep within? It was at this point that I met Lydia's eyes, and there was a strange tension between us. I realized that despite the cruelty and oppression of her father, Lydia was experiencing an inner rupture. Spending time with her, telling her the truth, was an important step in building the resistance. If I could bring Carr's daughter to our side, we would be one step ahead in my plan to overthrow this tyrannical government. The next time I met Lydia, I had the opportunity to talk to her in private. As we walked in a large garden outside the palace corridors, Lydia tried to explain why she was loyal to her father. For her, the only way to power was through ruthlessness. She believed the people were too weak to resist that power. "A man cannot overthrow a tyrant," she said coldly. I smiled and looked at her. "To overthrow a tyrant, you need brains, not brawn." As I spent more time with her, the tension between us began to give way to a kind of respect. We began to plan the resistance. I studied the planet's weaknesses. It was not difficult to find holes in Carr's security measures. Lydia was skeptical at first, but her confidence grew as she saw my plans could work. As Lydia and I spent more time together, our bond grew stronger. It was no longer just a matter of exchanging strategies, but a growing attraction between us. Lydia's strong warrior spirit and my strategic acumen came together. Together we not only started a resistance, but we also realized this bond between us. In the most critical days of the resistance, as Lydia and I went over our plans for the last time, our eyes locked. In that moment, even in the midst of war, we realized the extent of our feelings. This attraction took an unexpected turn when Lydia became pregnant by Lucas. But the war continued. The defeat of Kar, the liberation of the people, and a new future with Lydia pregnant awaited us. Night had fallen on Tyrion, but my mind never rested. Every moment I spent with Lydia not only deepened my understanding of the Resistance's plans, but also strengthened the bond between us. Every conversation, every glance, somehow brought us closer. But no matter what, our priority was to overthrow Kar and free the people of the planet. As we gathered the leaders of the Resistance, Lydia's influence could not be overstated. Her loyalty to her people and her warrior spirit further strengthened the Resistance. It was not only Lydia's fighting skills that strengthened the Resistance, but also their respect for her and their sense of hope. Her stand against her father gave the people of Tyrion the courage to fight for freedom. My role was to lead the strategy, combining the fighting spirit Lydia provided with the intelligence I offered. Lydia wore her armor as always, and the determination in her eyes always impressed me. We reviewed the Resistance's plans for the last time. The attack on the power center in Kar's palace was the first step in shaking the Emperor's power. The plan was simple but dangerous. Lydia and a few warriors would infiltrate the palace, while I would coordinate an uprising of the slaves in the mines. This two-front attack would undermine Kar's authority and strengthen the people's belief in freedom. This time it's win or lose, Lydia said, her face serious, but I saw a spark in her eyes. Our plans will work, I said confidently. We just have to keep our heads. The public needs to see hope. Lydia approached me. If we fail, it won't just be the end of us. Tyrion's last hope will be gone. There was a moment of silence. It was then that I felt the emotional bond between us deepen. No matter how strong and determined she was, the burden on Lydia's shoulders revealed the human fear within her. She hesitated for a moment, but the determination returned to her eyes. We will win this war together, Lydia. We are both here to free this planet. That night we took the first step. Resistance fighters and slaves faced the opportunity they had waited years for. The rebellion in the mines grew rapidly, and the slaves fought furiously against Kar's soldiers. When the palace's power center was sabotaged, the Emperor's armies were thrown into chaos. The people of Tyrion had been crushed by years of oppression, but now their courage was ignited. There was no turning back. In the midst of the battle, Lydia and I locked eyes. Under the spell of that moment, it was as if years of tension had been replaced by understanding and acceptance. Lydia's leadership cemented the people's trust in her. Her fight against her father's tyrannical rule had been the spark that brought the people to their feet. But there was more I knew now. Lydia was not just a warrior. She was the one who would change the future of this planet. As the war continued, the situation became more complicated when we discovered that Lydia was pregnant. It was a development that would profoundly affect not only our lives, but Kar's lineage. When Lydia learned of her pregnancy, she fell into a stunned silence. It was not easy to read the mixed emotions in her eyes, but the news burdened her with a different kind of responsibility. Not only did she have to fight to free the planet and save her people, but now the baby she was carrying had the power to change the future. Lydia did not waver in her resolve. "We have to end this war, Lucas," she said. "I can't let our son grow up in a world like this." I paused. Our son. The weight of those words touched my soul, even in the midst of war. I realized that the bond between Lydia and I was not just a struggle for two, but for a much greater future. In the final days of the war, Emperor Kar found himself cornered. His forces surrounding the palace were weakened, and the people found courage in the midst of rebellion. Lydia fought at the forefront of a resistance. Her strength and leadership kept the people together. I made strategic moves to weaken our enemies, igniting sparks of hope in the darkest corners of Tyrion. When we finally reached Emperor Kar's throne room, I saw the fear on the tyrant's face. He had thought he would rule forever, but it is not weapons alone that bring down tyrants, but intelligence and courage. "It is over, Kar," I said, lowering my weapon. "This planet will no longer live under your rule." Kar turned to Lydia. "I am disappointed in you," he said, hatred in his eyes. But Lydia's attitude did not change. "It was my duty to save these people, to give them their freedom," Lydia said, not a trace of doubt in her eyes. Carr made one last attempt to defend himself, but it was over. Lydia and I had changed the fate of this planet. The people of Tyrion were free at last. And I stood at the end of this war, not just as a diplomatic representative, but as one who would build the future with Lydia. The child who would carry Lydia's father's bloodline would also be the symbol of this planet's freedom. Tyrion's dark past had given way to a hopeful future. The tyranny of Emperor Carr was over, and the people were free. But the end of the war brought with it another process, as difficult as victory, the establishment of a new order. Lydia and I set out to determine how the planet would fare in this new era. After Carr's overthrow, the first step in calming public fears was to establish a system of government free of tyranny. Lydia was determined to take Tyrion's future into her own hands, but she had to gain the trust of the people so that her leadership would not be perceived as direct dictatorship. She had to stand on the side of the people, no longer as a tyrant, but as a ruler looking out for their interests. After days of meetings and public consultations, an advisory council was formed under Lydia's leadership. This assembly was filled with representatives from different parts of the planet. For the first time, everyone's voice resonated so strongly. The people who had come together during the resistance continued to trust Lydia in this new era, but that trust needed to be strengthened. Lydia had to lead them not only as a warrior, but also as a just and visionary leader. I was an outsider in Tyrion. I had to do more to earn the trust of the people. Though I had fought alongside Lydia, as a human, I was not truly local in their eyes. But my support and strategic acumen earned me their respect in time. I worked for a fair distribution of the planet's resources, new working conditions for the miners, and a rebuilt economic system. Meanwhile, Lydia's pregnancy became a symbol of a new beginning, not just for us, but for the people. The baby in Lydia's womb not only carried the lineage of a warlord, but also symbolized the future of freedom. The people felt they had been reborn under Lydia's leadership, and this baby reinforced their hopes. But Lydia's inner turmoil grew. She had to walk a fine line between being the daughter of a cruel father and the leader of her people. One evening, as we walked together in the palace gardens, I noticed that Lydia was deep in thought. She was stroking the baby in her belly, and there was a look of confusion on her face. "There is something that makes me think," she said softly. I approached her. "What is it?" Lydia stopped and looked up at the sky. "We fought to free this planet, but my father's legacy is still here. Will a child born under his cruel rule always carry that legacy in the eyes of the people?" It was then that I realized Lydia was questioning her future not only as a mother, but as a leader. I looked at her and saw the indecision in her eyes, but I also knew that we could find the answer to this difficult question. "This child will carry your legacy," I said, "not your father's. What you have done for your people, how you have changed the destiny of this planet, will shape his life. Your bloodline will now be a symbol of freedom and justice." Lydia's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness, but of relief. She nodded slowly and looked at me. "You're right," she said softly. "This will be our legacy, a future we build together." After this conversation, Lydia began to move forward with more determination, both for her people and for her own future. As her pregnancy progressed, the leadership skills she had developed in the resistance were now being applied to the process of rebuilding her people. She focused on long-term projects such as revitalizing Tyrion's farmland, providing for the basic needs of the people, and reforming the education system. Each day, she worked with increasing determination, doing her best to build this new order on solid foundations. I supported Lydia in every way I could. I developed new strategies for the sustainable use of Tyrion's resources, and I worked more closely with the people, trying to understand their needs. We took steps to strengthen relations between humans and Seraphians. This new society was being built on the ruins of the old empire, and this time an order of justice, equality, and peace was being established. As the months passed, we began to reap the rewards of the new order we had established in Tyrion. The people were more united than ever. Lydia's leadership came to be seen not only as a warrior, but as a leader working for the good of her people. I, once seen as an outsider from outside this planet, was now an ally who had the respect of the people. Lydia finally gave birth. The people of Tyrion saw this child as a new beginning. He was now the heir to a lineage that not only carried the burden of the past, but also symbolized the hope of the future. Our son was both the descendant of a tyrant and a symbol of freedom. This paradox was a reflection of the future we were building with Lydia. He was the harbinger of a new life rising from the ruins of the old order. After the birth, we appeared before the public in the great hall of the palace. Lydia held our son in her arms. The people erupted in applause and joy. For them, this was not just the birth of a child, but a symbol of the future salvation of Tyrion. Lydia's eyes shone with determination as she addressed her people. This child will be the future, not just for me or Lucas, but for all of us. His birth symbolizes a new chapter for Tyrion. Together, we will build a future of justice and peace. At that moment, standing among the people, the feeling of loneliness and alienation I had felt when I first came to this planet completely disappeared. This place had become my home. Together with Lydia and our son, we had planted the seeds of a new life on Tyrion. Wars, tyrants, and hardship were behind us. Now we had a future to build together. This planet was Lydia's and my common inheritance. I was no longer in some corner of the galaxy, but in a real home. After Lydia's speech, as the enthusiasm of the people slowly spilled out into the great gardens of the palace, I stepped back and began to watch the crowd. Lydia's determined and confident demeanor only reinforced the people's hopes for the future. Our son slept peacefully in her arms. This scene was a symbol of change beyond my imagination. But this moment of peace was accompanied by a doubt that rang like a warning bell within me. Everything seemed too perfect. The people of Tyrion had accepted Lydia's leadership, but I knew that with every victory came a threat, whether from Emperor Karras' former allies or some other outside threat. Weighed down by my thoughts, I wandered alone through the palace gardens, the cool night air and gentle breeze reminding me that this moment might be temporary. For a moment, I feared that we would not be able to protect Lydia and our son. How solid was our success in Tyrion? Most of the people enjoyed their freedom, but some still had not made peace with the legacy of the old regime. While I was lost in these thoughts, I noticed movement on the palace grounds. Several shadowy figures were rapidly approaching the palace. After watching them for a while, the uneasiness in me grew even more. Taking a deep breath, I quickly turned around and quickened my pace to get to Lydia. As I walked in, Lydia was having her final meetings with the counselors. As I approached her, she noticed my concern on her face and asked what was wrong with her eyes. Without speaking, I walked over to her and touched her arm lightly. "Something may be wrong," I said in a low voice. "There is a strange movement outside." Lydia stood up, her expression grave. "We need to find out what they're up to, and in the meantime we need to keep the population safe. If it's a threat, we need to use the same security protocols we used during the resistance." I nodded and moved quickly, once again impressed by Lydia's common sense and leadership. While I admired her ability to remain so calm and determined in this difficult process, I quickened my steps with an instinct to protect her and our son. As I reached the edge of the garden, I could see the figures hiding in the shadows more clearly. As I drew closer, a familiar symbol caught my eye, a symbol used by Karras' old guards. Could these people be the last remnants of Karras' tyranny, attempting to revive it? "Stop," I shouted, trying to convey as much authority as possible in my voice. The figures hesitated for a moment, then moved quickly away. I had the urge to follow them, but thinking that there might be a deeper meaning to this event, I decided it would be wiser to return to Lydia. "They may be former followers of Kar," I said. "Whatever they're doing, I'm sure it's not good." Lydia took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, thinking. "If they are indeed the remnants of Kar, we must find out. We will not let our people live under the shadow of tyranny again." Lydia's orders were quickly carried out, and the palace's security was increased. But the problem was much deeper than it appeared. Had Kar's former allies formed an underground movement that refused to accept his overthrow? And what threat did that movement pose to Lydia's new government? The next day, Lydia and I set out in secret to track down this underground organization. Lurking in the darkest corners of Tyrion, this movement seemed to herald a new nightmare that threatened freedom. The shadows of the old regime were waiting for an opportunity to return to the planet, and we would not rest until we had eliminated this threat once and for all. In the face of this new threat, Lydia and I would once again stand shoulder to shoulder. But this time, not just to overthrow a tyrant, but to ensure the lasting peace of Tyrion. We would have to defeat enemies both within and without, while leading the people to freedom. As we made our way back to the confines of the palace, Lydia and I quietly began to plan our next steps, both troubled by the thought that Kar's former allies, or this underground organization, might threaten the hopeful future of the people. I could see in Lydia's eyes how determined she was in the face of this new threat, but this time we had to develop a strategy based on protecting the future, not just winning a battle. That evening, Lydia and I retired to the palace strategy room, where maps, intelligence reports, and the economic situation of the people were laid out before us. We sat through the night discussing where possible threats might come from, what parts of the planet might still be loyal to Kar. This isn't just a localized threat, I said to Lydia, looking at the red areas on the map. Kar may have more supporters out there. This planet may be of interest to greater powers for its resources. Lydia nodded. You are right. If Kar's overthrow is only the beginning, there may be greater forces behind this underground movement. To protect our people, we will have to fight not only underground enemies, but outside forces as well. This was a new phase for us. Lydia and I would have to fight for the future of the planet, not only against internal threats, but also on a galactic scale. Our victory for human freedom echoed not only across Tyrion, but across the galaxy. But it may also have brought attention to us. The next morning, at the palace strategy meeting, Orion, one of Lydia's advisors, brought us a message from Offworld. It was from a representative of another interplanetary alliance, and it indicated that they were closely monitoring Tyrion's recent developments. Under Lydia's leadership, Tyrion's rise had begun to attract the attention of other planets. Lydia took a deep breath after reading the message. This could be both an opportunity and a danger for us, she said thoughtfully. There may be planets that are friendly to us, but there are also planets that want to control us. We must show them who we are and what we stand for, I said firmly. Freedom is something that not only this planet deserves, but every corner of the galaxy, and if other planets follow our lead, we can create a tidal wave of change throughout the galaxy. Lydia turned to me with a clear gleam in her eyes. You're right, Lucas. This is not just the fight of one planet. It could be the struggle of all the peoples of the galaxy. This new journey meant another battle for Lydia and me. But this time, I felt we had the power to make a difference on a galactic scale. Lydia's leadership had led Tyrion into a new future, but now we had to take the message to other corners of the galaxy. While Lydia continued to struggle against internal threats, and those still loyal to Kar, I began to explore the possibilities of interplanetary diplomacy. Each new alliance we forged with other planets in the galaxy would be a step towards strengthening Tyrion's freedom and security. But we had to be careful. Each alliance brought with it a new danger and a new friendship. As we held diplomatic talks with representatives from across the galaxy, Lydia and I constantly reviewed our strategies in the background. One evening, after returning from one of these diplomatic meetings, Lydia and I sat in the palace library, our son safely asleep in his apartment above the palace. Lydia seemed exhausted by the enormous responsibilities of motherhood and leadership. There was still a deep determination in her eyes, but this time there was a hint of weariness. We never know how much time we have to enjoy everything we have, do we? She asked me softly. His question reminded me of how fragile our happiness had been amidst all the chaos in the galaxy. We had saved Tyrion, but that didn't mean the war was over. But when I looked into Lydia's eyes, I felt that I had been with her every moment of this difficult journey. We are together, Lydia, I said softly. No matter what happens, we are together, and that means we can overcome anything. Lydia nodded slightly, a warm look in her eyes. Yes, We are together, Lucas. Let's never forget that. It was then that I realized something. In the midst of all the chaos and threats in the galaxy, Lydia and I were fighting not only for Tyrion, but for peace within ourselves, for the freedom of our people, our sun, and the galaxy. But at the end of every battle, what we gained was not just victory, but a life together with the people we love. And so Lydia and I continued our struggle. Wars, diplomacy, new alliances, all steps towards the future of Tyrion and the galaxy. But the real victory was waking up every morning with Lydia by your side, and being able to build a life with the people you love, even in the midst of war. As our diplomatic missions and our efforts to protect our people continued to run parallel, Lydia and I felt we were being drawn into a deeper responsibility every day. Not only were we ensuring the freedom of Tyrion, but we were also a beacon of hope to other planets in the galaxy. We knew that every step we took to build alliances, disrupt the plans of our enemies, and stabilize the galaxy was part of a bigger picture for the future. But this grand plan made the burden on Lydia's and my shoulders even heavier. One day, Lydia and I shared a long silence as we prepared for a new diplomatic meeting. We were on our way to the spaceport outside the palace to meet with an interplanetary representative. But the worry on Lydia's face was deep. Lately, I had noticed that she had become quieter when she went to such meetings. I was aware of the struggle within her. On the one hand, she wanted to protect her planet and fulfill her leadership role, but on the other, she was caught between the expectations of her people and her own personal feelings. Lydia, something is troubling you, I said as we approached the spaceport. I tried to encourage her with my eyes. What are these thoughts? Tell me. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed somewhere on the horizon. Lucas, you know that this process affects not only the future of our planet, but also our lives. I think of the life we've built together. I think of the constant struggle to protect our son, you, Tyrion, while at the same time I feel something coming that will hurt us all. Everyone in the galaxy expects something from us, but what if we lose this war? The weight of her words affected me deeply. Lydia was strong, but she also carried a lonely burden. I locked eyes with her. You have always been strong, Lydia. I am with you on this journey. No matter what happens at the end of the war, we will build this life together. But we can't let fear take over. Lydia took another deep breath. She smiled slowly, but this time her smile was more sincere and warm. You're right, she said softly. We walk this path together. At that moment, I felt once again that Lydia was not just a leader, but the person at the center of my life. She not only led her people, she led me. She was a symbol of resistance and hope, and being on this journey with her gave me the strength to face anything. On the way to the meeting, amidst the complexities of galactic diplomacy and the weight of politics, another threat lurked in the background. Lydia and I had sensed this threat. Kares' old allies or new powers could be setting a trap during these diplomatic meetings. Any new alliance was a potential threat. As we entered the conference room, I sensed that this was not just an interplanetary representative, but part of a larger plan. Lydia and I exchanged glances, both of us knowing immediately that something was wrong. Nevertheless, we quietly began our diplomatic discussions. Meanwhile, part of our minds were linked. I could communicate with her not only with words, but also with a look or a small touch. We went through the security protocols and conducted the meeting carefully, but our intuition that there was danger inside grew stronger. Lydia watched the representative carefully, taking strategic steps with all her determination and composure. For a moment, Lydia's eyebrows furrowed slightly, and I got an inner signal. The danger was closer. At that moment, the representative began to use threatening language towards Lydia, a hostility hiding behind the diplomatic mask. I began to suspect that Kares' former followers had a hand in this meeting. Just then, warnings from the palace's security systems echoed through the room. An attack was taking place outside the palace. I glanced at Lydia, and she was already on her way. As we quickly left the meeting and began preparations to manage the palace's defenses, the enemy's plans slowly became clear. This was not just a diplomatic disagreement, but the beginning of a conspiracy to destroy our people. As the attacks began, Lydia and I moved to the palace control center. We activated all defensive systems. While Lydia made strategic moves to identify the attackers' weak points, I coordinated the security units. This war could have an outcome that threatened the future peace of the planet and the freedom of Tyrion. Lydia's stance was as firm as ever as she gave orders to the security services. We fought knowing our son was safe, but this time our enemies were far more organized and powerful. The warlord Carr had been overthrown, but the chaos he had left in his wake still existed and posed a direct threat to Lydia's leadership. The enemy's attack had been halted, but not completely repelled. Throughout the night we fought with our resistance forces, defending strategic points under Lydia's orders. Each moment brought a greater sense of threat. I knew that the chaos in the galaxy was growing and that we had to stand against this wave. In the morning, when the attacks had subsided, Lydia came to me, her eyes full of fatigue, but also of determination. "This is only the beginning," she told me. "But whatever happens, we will fight to the end." And I looked at Lydia, and my faith and love for her grew stronger. We would continue to walk this path together, though new battles, challenges, and threats lay ahead. As the debris and chaos left by the attacks spread around the palace, Lydia and I discussed future strategies. The enemy had retreated, but it was only a harbinger of a larger assault. It seemed that Karr's former allies or other forces in the galaxy would take any opportunity to stop Tyrion's rise. But under Lydia's leadership, this planet grew stronger against each attack. That morning, I could see Lydia's warrior spirit rekindled as she stood with her people in the aftermath of the attack, mingling with them to boost their morale and restore a sense of unity. Inwardly, I continued to stand by Lydia, for her presence and determination gave me great strength. As people across the planet debated how to respond to this attack, Lydia began to think strategically. "Not only must we strengthen Tyrion's defenses," she said, "but we must also build stronger alliances with other friendly planets in the galaxy." "Who will be next after us?" she said in quiet desperation. "Carr has been overthrown, but this tyranny is not over. Something is brewing in the galaxy, Lucas. If we remain on the defensive, we could face an even greater catastrophe." Lydia's words signaled a larger battle for the future of the galaxy. This attack was not just a local problem, but a sign of a conspiracy targeting the entire galactic order. If we did not confront this threat, not only Tyrion, but many planets would be thrown into chaos. I agreed with Lydia. The turmoil in the galaxy had become a problem not only for us, but also for the other planets in the galaxy. Under Lydia's leadership, we had secured Tyrion, but now it was clear that we had to adopt a galactic-wide strategy. This decision would lead us on a long and difficult diplomatic journey, taking us to different corners of the galaxy. Lydia and I decided to forge an alliance with other planets in the galaxy, not only our friends, but also the planets that had previously opposed us. This was the most important step we could take to end Karr's reign once and for all. The first stop was the planet of Curated, once an ally of Karr's, but now unstable in his absence. Curated was one of the most resource-rich planets in the galaxy, making it a tempting target for enemies. If we could bring Curated over to our side, we would not only gain a powerful ally, but we would also be able to tip the economic balance of the galaxy in our favor. Lydia and I arranged a diplomatic visit to Curated. The planet's capital was a vast city, a place where crystal towers rose into the sky, where advanced technology and ancient culture coexisted. But beneath the beauty lay a deep conflict. After Karr's death, the planet's government was split in two. One faction favored the libertarian path Tyrion had taken, while the other favored the continuation of the old order. As soon as they set foot on Curated, it was clear that tensions were high. While Lydia negotiated with Lord Icarius, the leader of the planet, I sat in the background analyzing the strategic and economic situation of the planet. If we were to gain the support of this planet, we had to gain their trust. Lord Icarius was a decisive and cautious leader, but he had also been loyal to Carr in the past. Our first meeting with Lydia was fraught with tension, hidden behind diplomatic language. However, Lydia managed to overcome this tension with her usual poise. One evening, in a private meeting with Lord Icarius, Lydia made a bold proposal. She suggested that Curated not only act as an ally, but as an equal partner with Tyrion. Lydia's vision was based not on the freedom of one planet, but on a wider movement for freedom in the galaxy. "We are fighting for the freedom of all the peoples of this galaxy, not just one," Lydia said, looking Icarius in the eye. "Tyrion has been at the forefront of this struggle, but with your support, this movement can spread across the galaxy. We can end the legacy of Carr and tyrants like him once and for all." Icarius listened intently to Lydia's words, but the seriousness of the proposal made him think. If Curated sided with Tyrion, he could find himself at the center of a larger struggle in the galaxy. But Lydia's courage and determination shattered Icarius' hesitation. After a moment of silence, Icarius narrowed his eyes and nodded decisively. "I see Tyrion's vision and determination, Lydia. If we stand with you on this path, we can make this galaxy a more just place. Curated will be with you." With that decision, the balance of power in the galaxy began to shift. When Lydia and I won Curated, we were no longer on the defensive, but had taken an important step towards starting a great freedom movement in the galaxy. The success of this movement, however, depended on more planets joining the cause. As we left Curated, Lydia and I sat quietly in our spaceship, not knowing what the journey ahead would hold, but knowing that as long as we were together, we could overcome anything. Months of diplomatic travel and alliances across the galaxy had finally begun to bear fruit. Lydia and I had ignited a movement for freedom that would change the fate of not only Tyrion, but many planets. After Curated, many planets joined our resistance to free themselves from the shadows of cruel warlords and former tyrants. Across the galaxy, peoples were awakening. No longer content to submit in silence, they had decided to take their destiny into their own hands. But victory always came at a cost. Our enemies did not stand idly by and began to strike back, forming alliances of their own. The harbinger of the last great war broke out on the planet Draxus, one of the most strategic points in the galaxy. Due to its natural resources and strategic location, Draxus was of vital importance to both us and our enemies. Lydia and I knew that this war would determine the future of the galaxy. When the war began, all of Tyrion's allies were gathered on Draxus. The warlords attacked with all their might to restore the old regime. Huge ships crashed into each other in space, and the planet's surface echoed with conflict. Lydia was at the forefront of the battle, and as I looked at her, I saw once again how strong her fighting spirit and leadership were. She had become a leader who carried the hope not only of Tyrion, but of the entire galaxy. I coordinated the battle in the Strategic Command Center, where my analysis and plans, combined with Lydia's leadership, created the opportunity for the resistance to prevail. The dawn of galactic freedom became clearer and clearer as we defeated the attacks of our enemies. At the most critical moment of the battle, Lydia and I reviewed our combined strategies. The leader of the warlords, Varric, an old ally of Carr's, was preparing a final assault to thwart all of Lydia's plans. But Lydia's intelligence and my strategic foresight had anticipated this attack. Our final encounter with Varric's massive warship proved decisive for both sides. Lydia took command of the resistance forces and dealt the final blow to the enemy's heart. I had spent the last few hours trying to find Varric's strategic weaknesses. Finally, Lydia's powerful strike brought down Varric's ship. The moment Tyrion and the entire galaxy won the battle for freedom was sealed when Varric's ship exploded in the vacuum of space. With victory, peace returned to the galaxy. With the end of the Draxus War, the rule of the old tyrants was consigned to history, and a new order based on freedom was established in its place. Lydia became the symbolic leader not only of Tyrion, but of the galaxy. Her leadership inspired the other planets of the galaxy. The races began to gain their own freedom and live in peace. When the wars ended, Lydia and I returned to Tyrion. As I looked out over the vast gardens of the palace, I reflected on how much we had grown and how far we had come after all the struggle. Lydia and I had established a new order in the galaxy and given hope to the races. But at the same time, our love and devotion for each other had grown deeper every day. Lydia stood beside me, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's over, Lucas. Now we can give our people and our son a future in peace," she said, the deep determination still in her eyes. "This is only the beginning, Lydia," I said, smiling. "We have won the war, but now is time to build a true peace." Hand in hand we walked towards the vast lands of Tyrion. The peace and freedom that had spread across the galaxy was the result of our struggle. It was time to build a new galaxy, but this time not with war, but with peace and love. At the dawn of a new era that would reshape the galaxy, Lydia and I looked to our people and our future with hope. Together, we had overcome every challenge and would continue to be the guardians of that peace, no matter what came next.